Now that this engine's running, it's kind of fun to play with it. So I'm gonna start it up again, cold start. Also, I'm gonna do some important things like check the leak down of each of the cylinders, check the oil pressure, and we'll also check the air-fuel ratios as it's warming up. Fingers crossed, it's a runner.
Garage time.
This gauge was right here last time. This was what I used to measure the fuel pressure, and the fuel pressure was good. Now I'm going to move this gauge over to the oil pressure, and this is where the oil sending unit is, or the oil temperature sending unit is. So I'm going to try to measure the oil pressure there. So I'm going to remove that sender, although I had to make a special wrench. Let me show you. It's kind of awkward getting these big wrenches in there, and it's just too thick as well. So that doesn't work that great. So I made this guy. This is like a little crow's foot wrench, and I basically just took a piece of bar, cut the slot out, and welded a nut onto the end. So this is the correct size, goes onto the threads of that, and then I'll just put a socket on this and hopefully break it loose. There we go. There's a better look at how that fits right on there. Faster than going to the store for me, and getting a crow's foot this big is probably hard to find. Here's the little adapter on here. This is a metric thread. It's got an O-ring. Hopefully this gauge isn't too bulky. So I'll have to get a little smaller gauge. It just won't clear the fan strap. This gauge is just slightly smaller, but it does fit right in. All right, so it's upside down, but we should still be able to read the pressure. This gauge here is from my 911. I'm done using it. I set up the carburetors with this gauge while I was driving in my car. But this is the AEM air-fuel ratio gauge, and it uses the Bosch O2 sensor. I'm gonna put it in the stock location on this engine, and the harness is made for an entire car, but I'm just gonna set it up on my bench. So we'll be able to monitor the air-fuel ratios as the engine warms up. So I'm just gonna keep that here. So the gauge is powered on, it's wired direct to the battery back there. And then I also have this gauge. I'm only using it as an RPM gauge, tachometer. So it's set to the high scale right now, but we can put it into the low scale and see exactly what RPM this engine idles at. And no need to check the timing on this. The timing is completely controlled by the Motronic. There's not an adjustable timing on this engine at all. You can do leak down on a cold engine. It's better than nothing, but because this engine runs, it's more fair to do it after it's warmed up a little bit. It's obviously, engines are meant to be warm, and you're gonna get an actual reading of what it's like when the engine's operating. The engine's 100% cold, and we'll just give it a try. It's been sitting for a little over a week. Took a while to get fuel back in it. So with it being cold, it's got 60 pounds. Air fuel ratio is 14.7, 14.5. There we go, I got the tachometer to work. So let's put it on RPM low. And it is idling, that's 900, so it's at 880. Which I know is the correct RPM. 880 is, I think, correct. It's fluctuating between 880 and about, well, 850 and 900. It's a little bit too lean right now. Oil pressure is still close to 60. I'm gonna rev it up a little bit. We'll watch the oil pressure. You can see that needle is ticking a little bit. So as soon as it gets up to about 75, it kicks open. And there's some valves inside the engine that prevent it from going over pressure, especially when the oil is really cold. Still a little bit on the lean side here. Idle's bouncing around a little bit. This is the oil temperature right here. It's about 95, 96. We're still on the lean side here, and idle's getting a little bit more steady, but not much. Exhaust temperature, 275, 265. The oil pressure is dropping to about 30, which is still okay, but the oil's getting warmer now and it's starting to drop a little bit on the pressure. Idle's still at 880. Air-fuel ratios are still pretty high. Even if I switch it to high RPM, just listening to the ejectors. They're clicking. They're all clicking. Yep. Yep. Okay, all the injectors are clicking. Yep. It's up to 180 now, so it's pretty much operating temperature. 180 there. Almost 180. Oil pressure at idle is about 20, and it does go up when you rev it. Okay, the idle is getting a little more stable now that it's up to temperature. Right about 900, 880. But we still got a pretty lean condition. 16. 3,016. It ran for about 20 minutes or so, enough to get it up to like, I think 180. It's pretty much full operating temperature. So I'm going to take the plugs out. They're already been loosened a little bit. There's just a little bit of torque on the spark plugs. So I've had them out before. It's not gonna be difficult to remove them, even though the engine's kind of warm. But now we'll try the leak down and see what the condition is of the engine. Leak down is great because it tells you how efficient the cylinder is at holding air. If there's any leakage through the valve seats, both intake or exhaust, the leak down test will pick it up. So it tests the integrity of the heads, it tests the cylinder bore. If there's any scoring or scratching in the cylinder bore, air will leak through there. It tests the piston itself, the piston landing, and also the piston rings. So if there's any leakage in any of those components, it'll get picked up on the leak down test. So we're shooting for something in the 5% or less range. Let's see how well it does now that it's warm. Cylinder number 1's right here, so we'll always start with that one. And we just got to get the cylinder or the piston to top dead center. So to do that, we'll take off the distributor cap so we can make sure the rotor is pointing to cylinder number 1, and we'll also check that the crank pulley, it's got the mark pointing up, so we're right on top dead center. Right there is number 1. So we need the rotor to point to number 1, and then we'll look down here for some marks as well. So we'll just keep turning clockwise until that turns to number 1. And this belt's a little loose, so I have to squeeze it a bit. There we go. So the engine's turning. Not sure you can see the rotor, but the rotor's turning as well. Just want to point it to number 1. Okay, that's directly where the slot is, and now we're going to look down here at the crank pulley and try to see where that mark is. And yeah, it's right there. So you see the mark in the fan housing is almost there where the mark on the pulley is. I just need to go like another 1/16 of an inch and it'll be there. See if I can do it while holding the camera. Yeah. So right there is top dead center. So let's check the pressure in cylinder number 1. Like I said, the plugs are pretty loose. And there it is. Color of the plugs look a little bit white, as you would expect with a lean condition. There's no black on them at all. This is the same pitch as the spark plug, so it's got an O-ring on there. This doesn't need to be really tight. The O-ring will create a seal. Yeah, I can feel it tightening there on the O-ring. That should be enough. And then this is my leak down tester. It's basically just 2 gauges. One's the input pressure, one's the escaping pressure. In between these 2 gauges is a small orifice. That orifice is a 50 thousandths. So the amount of air that leaks through a 50 thousandths hole is really the leak down number. And this was created by the aviation industry. That 50 thousandths hole is kind of industry standard. And also the pressure, the FAA recommends 80 PSI. So we like to use 80. Some people go up to 100, which is the max. That just makes the math easier if you're trying to get a percentage. But the correct pressure is 80. And this will go onto the output side. And then we'll connect some input side pressure. Get my air hose. This is just a standard air pressure regulator. There's nothing complex about the gauges. So I've already got it up to 55. You can see those gauges. So I'm going to dial up 80 and we'll get the results here. And that's fantastic. I got 80 on the left and really 79 on the right. Gauges there. 80 on the input pressure and basically, yeah, 79. I mean, this is really good. That is less than, I think it's less than 1% leak down, which is fantastic. This engine has a top end rebuild, so we would expect some pretty good numbers here. Especially with the engine warm, this is great. I'm going to leave the plugs out as I rotate the engine, just so it's a little easier to rotate, because that fan belt's kind of loose. Goes 164, I got to check the firing order, but we should go over to the next one, which is on top dead center, which I think is number 6. Here's the firing order, 162435. So we finished number 1. I've removed all the plugs at this point. I'm going to go to number 6, do the same measurement in and out, on down the line, and I'll show you the results. So I'm looking for, at 120 degrees will be the next timing mark. So I need to find that. Now we plug our gauge in. Okay, same thing, dial it up to 80. And this is 80 and 80. It's fantastic. There's essentially 0 leak down on number 6. That's awesome. Okay, we're looking for the next 120 degrees. Right there, 2 marks lined up. Now we're on cylinder number 2. Okay, number 2 is right on the dot there. And this one's giving me a little bit more of a leak down number. So I got 80 in, and I got 70, 72, 74, 74 out. So this one's leaking just a little bit, which is not bad, but it is a telltale sign of how the engine's doing. And now it's a matter of where's the air going. So first thing to do is listen down here at the exhaust and see if you can hear anything coming out here. So I put my ear up here, nothing. Now listen over here at the intake. There's nothing coming from there. And then this is the crankcase breather right here. This is the end of the crankcase breather. If I put my ear on that, I can hear some air coming through. I'm gonna put the microphone on that right there. You hear the air coming right out of the crankcase, which means there's a little bit of air getting past the rings on number 2. Okay, number 4, I'm not getting any pressure on the cylinder. I think I might have aligned to the wrong mark here. So I'm gonna advance it to the next mark and see if it's just, this is an aftermarket pulley and there's a few extra marks on it, so I might have missed the mark there. All right, that's totally my fault. So this is not number 4, that is number 5. I'm used to, I guess, 356 engines because that was totally wrong. So this goes here. This one is number 4. It's no wonder I couldn't get that right. Okay, it's still got 0 pressure. I think I went past that mark. So I'm gonna have to come back to number 4 and do it again. I can't turn the engine backwards, so I'll just have to do that one again. I'm gonna move on to the next one, which is number 3. Okay, here's the results for number 3, 80 in, and I'm getting 78 out. And now we're set up for 5. This is great. 80 and pretty much 80. So we've got all the data except for number 4. I need to go back and do number 4, but I gotta keep turning the engine clockwise, so I gotta go 1, 6, 2, 4, and we'll repeat that one. Everything looks really good. Number 2 is the only one that had a little bit of leakage in the cylinder. Okay, here's the data for number 4. Finally got it adjusted right. And same thing, I got 80 and 74. So let's have a listen and see where that might be leaking from. Yeah, same, coming from the crankcase. Nothing from the air cleaner. Nothing from the exhaust. So a little bit of cylinder leakage, either from the bore, from the piston landing, or the ring itself. All the plugs are back in. Let's just get this distributor cap back on. So the ratios are the best when it's cold. 15 is still a little bit high. See, the RPM is just a little bit low. 850. So if I lay down underneath here, you can hear some ticking on this side. This side sounds a little better. This is the 456. 1, 2, 3. And now the ratios are climbing up again in the 17s. Here's the final leak down percentages. I got 0.6%, 0, 6%, 7%, 2%, and 0%. So it's a little bit varied, and none of the air is coming through the top end. It's all coming through either the cylinders, the pistons, or the rings, something like that. And this may be too early to tell. Like, I would just keep an eye on it. This engine's been sitting a while. It hasn't been driven under load. Those rings may reseat a little bit once it gets a little bit of load on there. And it's really borderline at the moment, but I would just keep an eye on it, check the oil consumption, make sure it's okay. But I don't see it as a major red flag. Ideally, it's 5% or less, but you know, it's within that range. I am uncomfortable with the air-fuel ratios. I wouldn't drive it like that. 17 is too much. There is an adjustment at idle to change the air-fuel ratio, and I'm not going to try to adjust it right now until the fuel injectors get clean. The reason why I don't think it's an adjustment, one, because the fuel injectors were kind of a mess when I took them apart. And number two, it seems to stay lean even at like 3,000 RPM, which is off idle. So I have a feeling the injectors are still not flowing as well as they could be. Plus one of them is a borrowed injector, so they need to be calibrated as a set. And it should really be in the 14 range. It should not be 17. That's a concern. So we are going to send the fuel injectors to be calibrated, and hopefully that will fix it. If not, we'll do some adjustments on the throttle body, try to get it more within its range. Other than that, we should probably do a valve adjustment. One side sounds a little noisier to me than the other side. We decided not to change the fuel lines at the moment. They're not cracked or leaking. That's further maintenance that I would recommend that Benji does once he gets the car. And other than that, you know, we just got a few more diagnostics to do, and it's almost ready to go in. An update on the ECU, it was sent out for repair. The seller actually agreed to take a look at it and have his guy double check it, make sure that it's up to the task. We also sent the harness along with it so that the two should work together, and when we get that back, we'll be testing the ECU here on the engine stand too. That's about it for today. Thank you again for watching and following the progress on this engine. I'm learning a lot as I go.